The Ecuador Guayaquil West Mission is completely the coast of Ecuador. It's the northern half of the coast, and it doesn't really get into any other areas. Unfortunately, we missed out on having the Galapagos Island by a little bit. I think it should be part of our mission because it's directly west, but it's still part of the South Mission. So you'll be serving a lot in the city. We have probably almost half of the city, maybe a third of the city, a little more than a third, and you'll be spending a lot of time there. And Guayaquil is a fun place. Like, I really loved serving there. It's just kind of the city's got a really unique feel. There's not really very many buildings that are higher than 2 to 3 stories, except for in the downtown area. And there's a lot of poor places, and those are the best places to serve. I love being there. Um, Outside of the town, when you drive through the countryside is absolutely beautiful for the most part. It's just very green, very, very jungly looking, and there's lots of rivers and towns and people, and it's just kind of got a really quaint quality that's just absolutely endearing. When you get closer to the ocean, though, everything gets very desert. Except for during the rainy season, everything is just kind of dead and brown for the most part, which is really strange. But if you go a few miles inland, then it starts to become very green and very beautiful. There are several towns outside of Guayaquil that you can serve in. One of the biggest is Manta, which, according to the billboards there, is the largest exporter of tuna in the world. I don't know if that's true, but the whole town kind of smells like fish. But it's a very nice town to serve in because there's usually a sea breeze rolling in, so kind of alleviates some of the heat that's there. And I would say there's about 10 to 12 stakes in the mission, I believe. And there's also 2 districts that you can serve in. There's Hippie Hapa and Pedro Carbo. And they both have a couple of sectors in them each. When you get to the mission, it's interesting. You'll hear that certain zones and areas are better to serve in than other areas, but I found that that's not actually true, especially when the missions changed. It was interesting because some zones that before had been baptizing zones, there was tons and tons of success there. They became holes, essentially, and there wasn't any success there. And other zones that before hadn't had very much success started having success. And that's the story you'll hear in any mission in the world. There's no such thing as a good sector or a bad sector. There's only what you make of it. And all sectors can be excellent sectors if you do the work right. That's not to say that you're going to be able to do the work right in all of the sectors. I think sometimes Heavenly Father has other ideas and you're not necessarily there to have tons of baptisms, but if you're doing your best, you'll know why you're there eventually, and you'll feel that it's right. You can be frustrating along the way, maybe not having as much numerical success as other sectors, but there's no such thing as a bad sector, and success is you trying your hardest. And that's something that's it can be kind of hard to keep track of, keep that idea in your head in Ecuador, just because there is so much success that it gets competitive quite easily. So it's important to keep that idea in mind. The church was established in Ecuador 50 to 60 years ago. The first missionaries got there, to my knowledge, I might not be getting this right, you can check my facts, but they got there, and the first real success was had in a town called Otavalo. And that's up in the mountains in a different mission, but it's a very pretty town. It's got a nice lake, and they call it kind of the little Utah sometimes because there's been an incredible amount of success there. It's a small town, but it has 2 stakes in it, which is like unheard of. So the church is doing very well there, and everybody there seems to be related too. The townspeople there, it's called Otavalo because they're the Otavalo Indians, and you can tell them apart because all of the men have long ponytails, and the women have these white blouses with kind of a flower design right here, and a lot of times they have gold collars as well, and they wear black skirts. The men, traditionally, they wear white pants, but as missionaries, they wear black pants. But the missionaries, they keep their ponytails, so guaranteed you'll meet Otavaleño elders on your mission, and at first you'll be like, why does that guy have long hair? But it's okay, they can have long hair. The church is really accepting of people's cultures and what's important to them, and they're great people. They are like probably half of the business that the temple does, I would say, even though they're like 10 hours away by bus. Every weekend there's several buses of people from Otavalo coming down to the temple. There's a very faithful, very, very good group of people. The temple itself is very beautiful, and if you're lucky, on your first day in the mission, you'll be able to attend a session at the temple. Usually, if there's time, you'll be taken to the office, which is right down the street from the temple, for interviews, and if there's time, you'll be able to go to the temple that day. If you're lucky, don't be sad if you don't. You'll be able to visit the temple at some point during your mission, usually around Christmas time, or if a convert gets sealed or something like that. The temple is it's very beautiful. It's up on a hill in one of the nicer neighborhoods in Guayaquil, and it's been there since about the year 2000, I believe. The members in Ecuador, the individual congregations, most of the places you serve in will be wards. There are several branches, but most of the areas you'll be in are wards, especially in Guayaquil. I believe almost all of the sectors in Guayaquil are wards. There might be 1 or 2 branches in the entire city, which has about 2 million people in it. And the assistants, that's not how you say it. You say asistencia in Spanish, but it's attendance in English. The attendance really depends on where you are serving. Usually in Guayaquil, in the more central parts of the city that are in our mission, you could have, it's about 100 people go to church or more every week. So you pretty much fill up the chapels in those places, because that's where the church has been the longest, where there's been the longest mission, and the missionaries have been there for the longest time. In other sectors, it's more like 75, 80 people on average. Once you get outside of Guayaquil, it can stay about the same or go down significantly. If you're in Manta, where I served for about 5 months, we had between 75 and 100 people usually. The largest ward in the stake there, they had about 125 people usually, I think, and they filled up the chapel. So that's good news for anybody, because you can rely on a lot of help from the members. That's really one of the most important skills in this mission, is using the members and finding an effective way to do that. A lot of times they'll say, oh no, I've already given all of my friends as references to the missionaries. But if you come up with new ways to get them to like you and to love you, then you'll be able to get tons of help from the members, and you'll see your success grow exponentially. It's mostly Ecuadorians. There are a lot of people from Colombia, however. I remember a lot of Ecuadorians complaining about that. Just a lot of immigrants, poor immigrants from Colombia. And you'll meet a lot of Colombians there. And actually, Colombian girls, like, they have a reputation, and I had some interesting experiences teaching them. You might just want to steer clear of them for the most part. They're very scandalous. And you'll hear a lot of stories from Colombia in Ecuador. You'll hear those stories, and I can confirm that they're true. So they're just very romantic people. But there's not tons of them there. There's some Peruanos there as well. Mostly, though, Ecuador, it prides itself on being a multinational a multinational country. But when it says that, it means mostly just the different Indian groups. And for the most part, they're relatively similar, and you won't run into a ton of them on the coast in Ecuador. You'll run into them, but not in the quantities that you would in, say, Quito, for example. So for mostly on the coast where we're at, it's mostly mestizos, just regular run-of-the-mill Ecuadorians. More up north by Esmeraldas, just outside of our mission, there's a lot of black people there, and you'll see black people throughout the mission as well. But for the most part, it's just normal Ecuadorians, at least in our mission.